tour begins here in this gallery. Please welcome, with ghoulish delight, your ScareLA ghost hosts, David Marklin, co-founder and executive producer, Laura Ivanova, co-founder and executive producer, Johanna Solano, program producer, and Rick West, lead program producer.
Good morning, Los Angeles. Happy early Halloween. On behalf of all of the producers here at ScareLA, we want to thank you for coming out, supporting the event, being part of the best community in the world. Thank you very much. And happy anniversary to that beautiful mansion in Orange County, down there in New Orleans Square. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to guess that there are a few Haunted Mansion fans in the house. Then certainly you're probably wanting to see some Disney legends today. And you're familiar with Jeff Baham from DoomBuggies.com? Well, then I'm going to shut up and we're going to start this convention. Jeff Baham, come on in!
Stage is yours.
Thank you, guys.
45 years. Today is the day. We're going to start. I'd like you all to stand up with me. Please stand. And while you're standing, look under your seat. Feel right into the front. If you feel a death certificate, now there are some seats with papers, but it'll be taped right to the front. If you find something taped there, it's a big... If you find this, please come up to the front. Right now, if you want a prize, a fantastic stainless steel. And everyone else stand up. We're going to get started. We're going to get the energy out before we bring the Disney legends up. Let's see if this is going to work.
So that was PowerPoint.
Oh, it did work.
It was just the end of the show.
Thank you, everybody. Let's see. One more time. Okay, you're going to have to do the slides manually, please, if we can whip through the first few slides, because I want you all to repeat after me. No offense to the Pledge of Allegiance, our great nation, but we're going to do our own pledge here. I think you know what it is. You may not even need it on the stage, but if you will recite along with me, when hinges creak in doors, chambers, and strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls, whenever candlelights flicker, though the air is deadly still, that is the time when ghosts are present, practicing their terror with ghoulish delights. Welcome, foolish world, to 45 years, when hinges creak, 45 years now. There's a bottle girl, please hand out the bottles, please. Right, step right over there to the side and grab your bottle. Thank you very much for, wow, everyone got one. Awesome. Well, I'm just going to start by introducing our special guests for this panel discussion today. The first guest that I'm going to introduce, neither of them really need an introduction to any of you, but he's responsible for almost anything with wheels. Anything that moves, this man had something to do with. But specifically today, he is the father of the Doom Buggy. He invented the OmniMover system, which conveys you through the Haunted Mansion. Please welcome with me Wet Imagineer Disney legend Bob Gurr. And of course, you know, Haunted Mansion had so many different artists and Imagineers involved with its creation and development. One of the key players was Mark Davis, one of Walt Disney's 9 old men, who started as an animator who created some of the most iconic characters that Maleficent, Tinkerbell, Sleeping Beauty. And then he went to work for Walt Disney to work in Imagineering to create some of the most amazing attractions and characters that we know. Well, his wife Alice also was an Imagineer. She worked in costuming and worked on a lot of things along with Imagineers, and we are privileged to have with us today Mark Davis' wife of late Mark Davis, Disney legend Alice Davis.
My God, you're all so quiet. Sit down. Talk about intimidating. Good God. All right.
There's one good thing about getting old. You can get more men.
Okay.
It's gonna be that kind of show.
You know, I was trying to think of some things. Thank you very much for coming. I was trying to think of some things to share with Halloween and Haunted Mansion super fans. You know, because the Haunted Mansion's history is pretty well known and it's pretty well told. But I think I have some things here that are going to be of some interest to you all. So okay. So we're going to start with a picture here of the Stour Castle in Kansas City. Now, probably most of you have never heard of this in relation to the Haunted Mansion. I'm gonna admit this very first little bit here. I'm going to talk about a little conjecture, but that's what I like to do. So we're going to do some conjecting. And this mansion was rumored to be haunted in Kansas City at the time, by the time Walt was just starting out with iWorks, starting to get his professional role as trying to get working in films and things in Kansas City. And you'll see, let me see if my laser's pointing here. You'll notice this little, this is a castle that was in Kansas City. Now, for reasons I won't get into, I believe that Walt was well aware of this building. He had a friend who was a relative of someone that was associated with the Stour family. And if we move forward to this, now you might recognize this picture. This is a picture that Harper Goff drew for Walt Disney when Walt was thinking of just, maybe I could have a haunted house, and this I think dates back to 1951, well before Disneyland ever was thought of. I think Harper may have been thinking in terms of, Walt may have been thinking of putting a little park by the studio in Burbank at this time, and but you'll notice that it has some very similar features to the Stour Castle. Now, I think that is a total coincidence, but what I'm going to point out to you here is that there's a lot of total coincidences in the development of the Haunted Mansion, some of which were fruitful and some of which were not. But that's just, all of this is to say, every theme park Walt Disney had a hand in developing, which would be Disneyland, of course, his Mickey Mouse Park, the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, and also Riverside, is that what it was called? The park in, they were thinking of building in Ohio. Do you remember that called Riverside Park? I think Riverside. that park also, all those parks, he planned on having a haunted house in there. And in fact, the Riverside Park, it was going to be the main thing when you walked into the gates. And you wouldn't see the castle at the end of the road, you'd see a haunted house. So it was clear that Walt Disney, from the very beginning, had in his mind Americana and small town America involves the haunted house on the hill on the side of the road, as you can see in our Crafts picture here. So I'm going to try to quickly get through some things. This, we're going to skip forward to about, well, no, this is 1950. This book came out right here, Decorative Art of Victoria's Era by Francis Lipton. Now, right around 1951, of course, is when Harper Goff drew that picture. In the mid-50s is when Ken Anderson started drawing pictures of haunted houses. So this was a new book in the Disney library at that time. Inside this book, there is this photograph. And this book was published in 1950. So at his house, this picture was taken, I believe, in 1937. So that looks familiar, you might say. So you hear stories about the development of the architecture of the Haunted Mansion. The truth is there was not a lot of change once Ken Anderson found this house and then drew this one. So you can see he did not even really change your perspective. And then, of course, Sam and Ken finished it off so they could show Walt Disney, and this is the famous drawing. We have the Haunted Mansion today. So, yeah, I know that when they were talking about the Haunted Mansion, Mark specifically with Walt, he had asked him, about should it be scary, should it be funny. Can you talk a little bit about Mark and Walt's conversation about the Haunted Mansion being funny versus scary?
Yes.
Use your microphone.
I'll never get used to this. No, the thing that Mark wanted to ask Walt about was that he wanted the haunted house, and he said, I want you to do something funny in it. But he said, what I want most of all is I want the outside of it pristine clean, and I want the lawn mowed, and I want the flowers looking very nice, and I don't want anything to have to do with being haunted or anything else. It's just going to be the haunted house. But he said, I want it clean. He said, I want all the parents to see that my park is clean. And they're not going to get dirty or poisoned or anything. They're going to have a place where they can come and have a wonderful time, and the whole family can enjoy it together. And he said, then when you go in the house, you can do anything you want, make it as haunted as you want, and so on. And Mark said, well, do you want something like the Adam family? And he said, no. He said, I want it to be what we would have it. And he said, we have a lot of people working on this, and we'll come into what will be a good haunted house, but it has to be pristine clean, because I want them to know I have a clean park.
Yeah. that's right. So that's why this painting, when actually, I've heard Sam and Ken talk about, when this painting was shown to Walt Disney, Walt said, that's not what we're looking for. Of course, the architecture obviously was what they were looking for, but all the baths and the spooky moss, that's what Alice is saying. None of that. We're going to keep it nice and clean. So, stepping back in time a little bit to the 50s again, a lot of the Imagineers worked on the Haunted Mansion. It wasn't, you hear a lot about Mark Davis, who we're going to talk about quite a bit in a little bit, Claude Coates, but there were a lot of, originally, before they got too far into the development, a lot of the artists that were working for Walt came up with ideas. Now this is by Bruce Bushman, who did a lot of Fantasyland work, but you can see he had an idea for some giant portraits that were menacing, which is something that actually made its way all the way into the actual mansion. So for a moment I'll talk about Ken Anderson. Ken Anderson, of course, was the person that first said, okay, I want you to make the Haunted Mansion. He wanted him to kind of run the program at first. So in the late 50s, I think around 1957, he drew that picture of the haunted house, and then he started putting together little mock-ups, and I think Ken Anderson even had a room in the studio where he would mock up big life-size versions of his effects. And so we're going to have to not talk a lot about that part of the Haunted Mansion's development today, but suffice to say that Ken Anderson, and here's a sketch that Ken Anderson did. So you can see he had the idea of, kind of a haunted-looking house, spider webs, cracked plaster, there's a ghost at the end of the hall. Kind of a traditional haunted house. And somehow it never really worked out. He had some very intricate plans for the Haunted Mansion, actually, and that wasn't precisely, I suppose, what Walt was looking for. Ken Anderson went on back to animation, and then later on, Yale Gracie and Roller Crump came into the picture and started working on Haunted Mansion. So here's some construction photos of Haunted Mansion, just building it in Anaheim. And there's the Haunted Mansion when it first opened. You can see the beautiful bronze plaques that probably were that way for less than a year before they turned the beautiful patina that we have today. So, and this is Walt Disney World. This is just to show you an example of kind of the scale of the ride you're in. You can see that's the space it takes. And of course, this isn't the whole building, but that small facade, and that's even bigger. That facade right there is probably about the size of Disneyland's. They kept, no, maybe that is the whole thing. But at any rate, it's obviously, and you'd be surprised how many people still think you walk into that house and everything happens and you come back out. And I get that a lot of people think that's what's involved. So, but that's a little bit about the history. There's Yale Gracie working on some special effects. He and Rolly Crump sequestered themselves and just came up with all kinds of crazy things. And then I'll mention also Harriet Burns, who was in the model shop. Here's a model she built of one of Mark's characters, the Hatbox Ghost. He's kind of famous. This is a mock-up of the attic and him in his place. And then, of course, right here is the Hatbox Ghost. This is the only photo, by the way, of the Hatbox Ghost in the Haunted Mansion that I know of. There's a little video also out there that someone caught of kind of going by him in the mansion, but that's another picture. Okay, oops, let's go back. Okay, so another Harriet's mock-ups. There's a conveyance there in the middle and some people sitting there. So, pretty quickly after Ken Anderson left his role on the mansion, the designers realized we're going to need to take people through this on some kind of conveyance. Walking through, because Walt did a lot of, he visited or some of his Imagineers visited quite a few walking tours at Hearst Castle, Winchester Mystery House, trying to figure out, how does this work and how many people can we take on a tour of a big building. They finally decided, it's going to have a conveyance. And fortunately, we have on stage someone here who knows a little something about conveyance in Disney parks. So, Bob, I was wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about maybe in fact before the Haunted Mansion. I know the Haunted Mansion we'll talk about in a moment, but when you really started thinking of conveyances for the Disney parks, when did that all really begin? How did that come up from Walt and the parks deciding we're going to
I got one of my own.
deciding we're going to need
We had to watch out between the two of us. It's 170 years. Well, thank you, Jeff. I thought this was going to be a simple panel. No, it's a trade show. I walked around, I saw animated intestines falling out. And I noticed everybody dresses in black. However, you will know my shoes are blood red. And I learned just before I came in, this really, truly is a cult. I saw you all stand up, salute, and stare at the words. What am I in here for? Well, I'll talk about the mansion. As some of you know, at Great Enterprise in those days, we had a lot of people working on a lot of different things. None of these projects ever started and stopped. They were kind of a blend of activities over a long period of time. with Walt just kind of sifting a bunch of ideas through a bunch of people. And obviously, by 1951, Walt wanted a haunted mansion. And then, of course, the closer we get, there's more gags to do with the show. Yale Gracie was really the leader of that pack, along with Rolly Crump. And Walt just gave Yale this room and said, well, just go in there and play, do something, anything you want. No deadlines, no nothing. So every once in a while you'd walk by the hallway by Yale's office, and then he'd open the door like a creepy door, and he says, come in. And he's got a gag, he wants to show you a gag. Because, you know, we mock up a gag, and then, of course, we convert it into a real show action equipment. But he would do stuff, and some of you, know the history of Yale Gracie. Some of these gags would scare the daylights out of the janitors at night. They would go back in there. But over time, we did a lot of mock-ups at the studio on a sound stage. So at some point in time, around 1962, over at 800 Sonora, where all of us were finally moved out of the studio into one building, we had a large drafting room, and there was a number of drafting, mechanical people, architectural people, graphics people, and it was led by a guy named Harvey Gillette, who was a real dyed-in-the-wool classic architect type of designer. And somehow in 1962, even before this haunted mansion project was underway, he talked Walt into the fact that, well, let's just go ahead and design it, because he wanted to design it. He took Anderson's sketches, and he laid out that building, and he personally drew almost all the drawings for that structure. And something I never understood, somehow there was approval to go ahead and build that building long before the show was figured out, and years before it was ever going to be a mechanical attraction. So that's a curious point of timing, that normally we would say, okay, we're going to do a whole project, and then we would do it down the park. This house suddenly just showed up because Harvey wanted it. And as you can appreciate in the previous picture he showed you, that people think, well, how are you going to get all that stuff in the house? Well, if you look at aerial photos of Disneyland, you'll see that the attraction is way out behind the railroad, and there's this big steel bridge that was built in order to have the train go over the top of the walkway, where after you go down through the elevator, you go out and back. All that had been figured out before we knew what the heck we're going to do. And then, backing up to early 1966, we had a new attraction called the Voyage Through Inner Space. And oh, many of you knew what was going on in that dark ride. And several of them kind of intrigued me. One of them was the AT&T thing, where it was a chain of vehicles. So just sitting there in John Hinch's office one day, you guys all know this, I'm sitting there and I pick up his candied apple, and I'm talking about, if we could have a show where we could direct the audience into the different scenes, so we would segue through a story, and we could just put people, we just kind of twirl them, and I twirl the apple, and I said, yeah, then we could put it on a track, goes up and down, turns right and left, and we just turned the car relative to the chassis. A conversation just as quick as that. And I said, yeah, you can turn in all directions. And since I was an airplane pilot at that time, one of the navigational aids is called an Omni, meaning all around. So we're going to move OmniMover. So just in a quick conversation, that name started as just a place setting, got stuck with it. This whole darn thing's all called OmniMover now. But then they said, well, let's get going on a thing for Monsanto. We'll use it there. And I figured out a gag where you have a rotating turntable, and for certain technical reasons that had some advantages. So the car actually was designed for the Monsanto attraction, but as I was developing that, we had a little test track at the back of the warehouse at 1401 Flower in Glendale. And upon the management people came over and looked at this thing and said, oh my gosh, we can make it a ride-through. It solves all the problems. Walt said it's not going to work as a walk-through. So a lot of history, people think, oh, the OmniMover came first and was in the Haunted Mansion. Haunted Mansion picked up an idea in the middle of the development of a test for Monsanto. That's how this history gets all goofy up here.
Okay.
That was it.
That's great. And the OmniMover.
I have to take it, I need to get right out here.
Yeah, please do. I do. And
Do you think that's water? No, one of your exhibitors here, he loaned me this, and he says, it's Zombie Princess. Ooh, I like this. What is this?
I think you got me.
Look, that's what it says, Zombie
It
Princess.
doesn't say Zombie Princess.
You got a martini.
Now,
You go ahead now.
so you can see the OmniMovers here are, it's more than just a little carriage that you sit in, it's actually the bulk of it is what is underneath. And so when you're in the Haunted Mansion, you're actually raised up on a false floor through the whole thing so that the OmniMover has room to function.
Where did you get that picture?
I can't exactly tell you where I got that.
That is a big rat's nest of stuff. What's going on? That looks like a repair job.
It probably is. I'm assuming that's why they're...
Yeah, because on the left of the picture, that bright colored thing,
Yeah,
that's actually a surfboard.
that is?
Yeah, when you have a cover the track between the vehicles, it looks like a surfboard, so it's officially known as the
Oh,
surfboard.
so you call it surfboard.
So you didn't know that.
I didn't know that. And now we're getting super nerdy. Okay. Well, thank you, Bob. And we're talking a little bit about Mark Davis. Now, you might recognize this painting here. This is one of many concept sketches and paintings that Mark Davis did for the Haunted Mansion. Many of them made their way into the Haunted Mansion, and many of them didn't. Now, I'm kind of excited that we're able to share with you today some of Mark's artwork that either didn't quite make it into the mansion or things that you just might not have seen very often. Maybe it made it into the mansion, but you haven't really seen it very much. So without further ado, I'm going to take you on a little trip here. Now, one thing you'll notice, this obviously is going to be a changing portrait. You see that Mark had kind of a wicked sense of humor. Right? And one of the reasons I believe that Walt brought Mark to the park was because he felt like Disneyland needed a little bit more of a sense of humor. So Alice, I was wondering, maybe you talk a little bit about Mark's sense of humor. Where did he get that wicked sense of humor?
I think he got his humor from the traveling that he did. He went to almost 20 grammar schools before he graduated from the 6th grade. His father was chasing the rainbow, and always the grass was going to be greener on the other side, but it wasn't. So he kept going. So the shortest time Mark was in a school, he was there for 27 days, and then went to the next one. His humor was from living all over the United States, from state to state and back again and so on. But the home place was in Northern California. Mark was born during the gold rush, oil rush in Bakersfield. And he was born there, but left at 6 months. He found out it was not too great a place to be. So anyway, but his sense of humor was living in all these different places and finding out how the humor was different from each place he went to. Plus the reason he started drawing was because when he would go from school to school, the young boys would get this young kid out onto the playfield when it was recess and just beat the daylights out of him. So he decided he'd start drawing pictures. And so he'd draw pictures of all different kinds of things, and they wouldn't beat him up if he'd give them a painting or a picture. So that's what started him doing it, and that also helped his humor and also helped his body.
But yeah, I think one of the things about Mark's humor that is so interesting is that in Disneyland, you know, it's a whole family park, right? You have kids and adults and grandparents, and somehow Mark knew how to reach, with one joke, a little kid or their grandparents. His humor could reach almost anyone with one single joke, which I think is amazing.
That was why Walt removed him from animation and took him to Disneyland, because he said, it's not funny anymore. He was having Mark at different times do something funny, like the family that was going up a pole with a rhino. That was the first joke Mark put in the park. And so after that, Walt would always come and say, we need something funny over here. And so he was doing this, and he was doing so well at it, Walt took him out of animation and putting in the shows and rides and jokes at the park.
Yeah, some interesting things I think here. You see here, I believe this could be Pirates or it could be the Haunted Mansion. It kind of goes with both of the, you know, you see the same gag in the Haunted Mansion sort of in one of the stretching portraits. So, and of course Mark worked on both of those. And here's a series of changing portraits for the ghost ship. And one thing I think is interesting is I do believe Mark, when he's kind of got heavily involved with the Haunted Mansion development, I think he went back and looked at what had been done, and some of his concepts I think built on things early on in the Haunted Mansion's development. They were talking about sea captains and that type of thing. So you know, he does have a number of works that are based on that type of thing, you know, the ocean, pirates. But another thing that, like this for instance, is a Greek, perhaps a Greek goddess or a Greek girl who changes into an olive tree. Now that's really interesting. One thing I want to note about this painting actually you can see right now in person at the Walt Disney Family Museum. If I can stop to give a little plug, at the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco at the Presidio, there's a Mark Davis exhibit of artwork right now. Yeah, here's a it's actually quite amazing how much artwork they packed into that little exhibit, and there's a whole wall of original Haunted Mansion concept artwork in there. So, you know, for us nerds, it might be worth a trip to San Francisco. But and this is one of the paintings you can see. All that to say, there were, I don't want to know if I want to say hundreds, possibly hundreds of concepts that Mark did that were not used, at least dozens. Here's Henry and Anne Boleyn. He's there, and then he shows up a little angry at what went on there. One of his ideas. And so this is a little bit closer to some of the changing portraits we ended up with. This is a witch of Valpurgis, I believe, and then she changes. A little bit more intense there. So, you know, his works span everything from kind of true horror to really just silly things. Did Mark really, Alice, did Mark have any kind of supernatural reasons or beliefs for this, or was he just trying to look at whatever he thought would talk to people? In terms of like spookiness, how did he come up with his ideas for what would be haunted or what might be spooky?
See? He not only would do that, but he would always go in to the library and get out a ton of books, and he would go through books after books after books and write down all the different things they would hold. Would be something that the whole family would be interested in. And the humor, how he would put the humor into it, and what style he would put into it.
Because it is interesting, his humor spans everything from silly and gags to ironic, to almost kind of grim. This was one part of a changing portrait would have been a bouquet of beautiful roses that changed into this. So. And then some of Mark's concepts were, one thing, Tony Baxter, I was speaking with him a little while ago, and he told me Mark Davis' work is interesting in the fact that it had no crutches. He said lots of the artists he's worked with over the years, when they're developing concept art, they got to put a little person in the front kind of pointing and say, oh, look over there, that's the joke, or, check this out. But Mark would only draw things that you were going to see. Like, he knew exactly the effect it should have on the viewer without having to show you, like, this is how it'll be in the attraction. So this is an example of a scene that he had envisioned for the Haunted Mansion. And Alice, you want to explain what's happening here? I know that can you explain this picture, Alice, to us? That's right. It's the tiger.
Oh, that's one of my favorites. It's the Great Hunter. And he has his tiger there. And he has parts of it. Instead of putting it just whole, he has like the tail hanging there. And then he has the rug coming up and biting him from the back. And just all different types of things that you wouldn't think a person would do. But it's funny. And that's how Mark would work. He would go into all kinds of information and books and things on tigers. He would come up with that.
Yeah, and then we're showing him now the ghost in the library taking a bath.
Yeah, the brilliance of Mark's drawings was not only the macabre kind of humor that's very subtle that he just inherently understood. She explained he could make a drawing of a gag with only 2 or 3 little notes about this moves here or that does that. He could walk that drawing over to Maple, which was the division of the company that we manufactured all the animations and different kinds of creatures, and just simply hand it to one technician. That one technician would take a look at it, and in a week or so, he's got this whole thing built with all the animated moves and everything in it. You didn't need any technical drawings. You didn't need any engineering of any kind. Nobody between Mark and the guy building the gag. Mark could come back over and look at it and say, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. It was so efficient way to work, and Mark was the only guy that made drawings that you could immediately understand the gag and you could actually build the gag.
The ones doing that love to have him come and look. And then they'd say, I remember this time, he would say, look, boss, we got it closer this time. And every time he would come in to see it, he would come and look at it. And before he could say anything, they said, this is the closest we've gotten yet, huh, boss? And they were very proud of it, and they wanted the drawing left there for a few days so everybody could see the drawing and how close they came to his drawing.
Well, it was easy to do because his drawings made sense right from the get-go. You didn't have things that were far out or things that had too much extra gag in it. It went right to the heart of the essence of the gag, and everybody could understand. It's so simple.
He was very good at that. I think he was the best at staging things.
So here's Mark's concept for the seance. This one, a little bit more, possibly a little more grim, a little more serious. And then there's another one, maybe a little more blue, a little sillier. And the cat, of course. I don't know. I don't know if this is when they were considering having, if the cat's just a character in the scene, or maybe when Exotensia was thinking for a while, maybe a cat would be your guide to the Haunted Mansion. I'm not sure either way, but some ideas he had for that. And then there's another drawing. I like the cat. Got caught up in the whole spell there. So, and then here's some of Mark's concepts for the ballroom. Dancing ghosts, you know, where that can work. Well, the end result is pretty literal. Ballroom dancing ghosts, but maybe those are the dancing ghosts up in the corner. And then this, there's grandmother knitting in the ballroom, but this is Mark's idea that who knows exactly what relative of hers she was knitting for. I'm not sure. Someone with a number of arms. And then so yeah, you can see, and this one is a little bit more not so funny, and a little bit more intense. So his sketches really did run the gamut. You know, when he was considering things. And then so this is what Bob was talking about. Like he would just write a little note there. This is what happens. And you can tell exactly what you were supposed to be seeing in the gag. So this is another ballroom gag he had. Someone just dancing on chandeliers. So now we'll talk about the bride a little bit. This, I believe, is the first bride that was installed in the Haunted Mansion. You wouldn't really see her face, and I'm not certain that it was quite so creepy as it might look there. I think it was all painted black. You know, this is in the light picture, and then with some Mark Davis concepts of the bride. I know, Alice, you were talking to me earlier about the bride, and kind of, maybe you can talk a little bit about Mark's idea about the storylines in Haunted Mansion.
Well, Mark said that the thing that was most important was to put on a show that you only had 12 to 14, 15 minutes at the most. That you would be looking at something and it would tell you a story, but it had to be a story in pieces, but have it work together. So he said most of the time you would only see maybe 12, 14 seconds of a movement or something, and it had to go into something else that could keep the story going, but different. And that was what was the problem with the bride, was you couldn't carry the story of the bride all the way through the show for 14 minutes when you only had so many seconds per character to go through. Like looking at the bird cage with the gadzooks, I can't remember. But anyway, it was blood in the dish instead of water, and there was a bone instead of seeds and such for the bird. And it had the old-fashioned palm tree that you had in the old houses for decoration. But when you had to go with the bride all the way through, you can't carry a story because you have to have other things going on to keep the interest of going through the show. And with the pirates, you had to have them going very quickly too, because you had much to cover in a short time, so you couldn't do this. So when you've got a bride that's sitting there and the groom hasn't appeared, and then all of a sudden now it's somewhere else for a few minutes, for a few seconds, and then somewhere else for a few seconds, you have to have a lot of stories going with the position she was in to get to the end. So that's why it was removed and slowed down. And some people liked it and some people didn't, but Mark felt that it gave more of a story.
Yeah, it's interesting that the bride from the very earliest treatments, Ken Anderson had ideas for the haunted house. There's always been this bride in some way, shape, or form, and we still have the bride. And they've kind of gone back and tried to build up her story a little bit with the attic, with the way it is now. But yeah, I mean, you can see from Mark Davis Concepts that he was trying to, what can we do with this bride if we want to have a bride and tell a story in one little quick scene? What can we do? Maybe she lost her head. Maybe she's more of a goofy bride. I think this is interesting in the sense that you see his sketch and then you see the maquette they built, and they are very similar, but they feel very different. His is a little more kind of silly, and that one's a little bit more sinister the way. And that maquette is actually the one that they put into the attic mock-up for the mansion. And I think that's kind of the way they ended up going. Oh, this painting, by the way, the bride walking her dog is also at the Walt Disney Family Museum right now. You can see it in person. And I thought this was interesting. I'm not sure if these are supposed to be tied in with a bride or maybe bridesmaids or what, but they're kind of younger. You see younger girls, one with a flower, one with a doll. I mean, they're kind of silly, but if you think about it, like, would you want to ride through the Haunted Mansion and see that glowing doll, girl holding her doll? Like, wouldn't that be the creepiest thing in the whole Haunted Mansion on the side of the track? So he had some really, some eerie thoughts and ideas. So you might recognize this. I think I don't know if it's a dog, a hellhound, something that we find in the graveyard. So a lot of Mark's concepts did make it, obviously, into the Haunted Mansion, and that's kind of how he was translated in a horrible flash picture, which doesn't really do justice to what you see. Haunted Mansion is one attraction where it's really true, no flash pictures, because everything will look terrible when you take pictures of it if you use a flash in there. And it's interesting, when they were building the animatronics for the Haunted Mansion, they decided to just let you see the nuts and bolts. I mean, that's kind of the skeletal look they wanted to use, rather than trying to imitate bones and things. They just, you see the nuts and bolts through a clear skin, right? Do you know anything about their decision to do that? How they came up with the idea? So let's just show people the guts of the animatronics. Were you involved with any of that?
Well, that's really easy. We used clear butyrate plastic, which is a thermoformable flat sheet material. We started doing that in about 1963. Just a standard body part, but obviously, if we build a little armature, a little framework, whether it's animated or not, and you build it kind of goofy, and you simply put plastic parts on and forget to put the fur on it, you got a ghost dog.
That's right. And then this is just an example of another Harriet Burns sculptures of one of Mark's concept drawings that actually made it into the Haunted Mansion, the Ghost Band. I think every set piece in the graveyard was designed by Mark Davis, I believe. I'm not certain of that, but I think it's true. And then another one of his gags, two characters, executioner and his victim holding his head in his hand while they sing a happy song. And then this is interesting, some character designs. You kind of see a character that kind of made its way to become like the Hot Box Ghost, and another guy that's a very familiar hitchhiker. This is before I think the hitchhiking ghosts were totally worked out, but those characters obviously became, our famous hitchhiking ghosts. Okay. And there's, so you can see the just don't put on any skin and you have a ghost, right? This is just for fun. I thought you might like to look at a close-up of little Leota. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is that her skin is obviously painted bright green. The Haunted Mansion uses a lot of very creative lighting techniques. They use infrared lighting, black lights, for a lot of things, but they also use incandescent lighting. And I've heard that that's, maybe, I don't know if you've heard this or not, maybe you can explain, but I've heard that they did that to differentiate between kind of the real world, the living world, and the ghost world. Have you ever heard anything about
Yeah,
that?
lighting is very tricky. A lot of it goes back to the early days of Disneyland. We had a lot of black light in those days. And that seemed to be the only thing that would, really make something look different. And of course, the ultraviolet light, you could just do painted flats and get away with, something really cheap. But there are certain places that this type of lighting would make a difference between something that is literal and dimensional and something that's kind of implied. So that was still a good tool of lighting.
Yeah, certainly. And and Haunted Mansion is probably one of the attractions that uses lighting to the most dramatic effect. So that's the end of my slideshow. So I think we have time now to have some questions from the audience. I'm sure some of you have questions for our Disney legends. We're going to have you raise hands, and then I think we have some helpers that are going to come up, and they'll select you. And I don't know if we can, I'll slides up a little bit because I can't quite tell what's going on here. But
Raise your hand if you have a question.
okay, so if anyone has questions, please raise your hand.
And come on up with it.
Hi, my name is Michael J. Curry, and I'm writing a book. I have a book coming out actually on Halloween Day called The Ghost of Walt Disney and Me, and I've been researching it for 20 years. I interviewed Alice very much and Mark Davis and several people involved in creation of Disneyland and Haunted Mansion. But I have a very unusual question for Bob Gurr, and that is about Walt Disney. Do you know what type of cigarettes he smoked?
The main one that he was smoking, which smelled bad enough as it was Sweet Caporal, the Canadian one. And in the year before he passed away, he shifted to these little cigarillos called Eric, E-R-I-K, and that really smelled like dead rope. I would have loved to slip him a junkyard, come be playing with a snow pecker.
Another question?
I was just wondering what your thoughts are on some of the different variations they've done of the Haunted Mansion, including like the one in Paris, which is very, very different than the one in California and Florida, and also the annual changeover to the Nightmare Before Christmas. Do you think that's a good thing for the mansion, or what do you think?
Well, if you read the plaque at Disneyland, it says, Disneyland will never be finished, and there's always this argument, what would Walt have done? Well, if Walt had been around, I can assure you, at least in my observation, he would have kept improving stuff, particularly every time there was a new tool to tell a story, new ways to, technology to make stories more interesting. If you just look at just the Haunted Mansion alone and look at the changes in audio and lighting over 45 years, it got better and better and better. There's a lot more clarity to sound. There's a lot more clarity to the visual thing you see, just due to the much better kinds of lighting that we've got today. In retrospect, it'd be a shame to keep it original with old incandescent lighting, stuff like that. They're really not good. But what you want to do, you want to keep telling the story the best way you can do it. And if it means changing it and using modern tools, well, so be it. That's what we do. And also for the other parks, there's certain thematic differences in different countries. Different people have different takes on a story. So the story writers always take a look at that and see if we need to shift something one way or the other that kind of fits the locale that the story's being done in.
Do you want to share a thought about Phantom Manor Office?
I would like to add this part. I think Walt would have a tizzy over the show in Paris. It was dead flowers, the grass was all yellow, and not very much of it, and the rest of it was just hard earth. And they had a man come out that was over 6 feet tall with a big, tall, Abraham Lincoln type hat. And he would come out and stare the hell out of all the little kids. Walt would just about wet his knickers on that. And then you went inside and they did things with the audio-electronic figures that they weren't able to do yet. They hadn't moved it far enough. So most of the time you had a curtain closed saying, we're working on the figure. Or this, we can't run it today. And that's bad too. It's better to go without it until you get it working.
Sure.
It's like the New York World's Fair with the Illinois building was 3 weeks late opening because they couldn't get Abraham Lincoln working properly because it had to be done differently from the others. And the guys were working day and night trying to get it to work. In the meantime, the Japanese put, what are the bearings?
Oh, little ball bearings.
Little ball bearings, big tubs of on each side because people thought that they were putting those not to show what they could make, but to give them, to fill their pockets with them and go over to Lincoln. And they throw these bearings at Lincoln because they thought it was a man in a suit. They didn't think it was another man. And it covered the ground with the floor of the theater with these bearings, and the poor guys would go out to work on the figure to check something, and they hit these and they just go sprawling all directions because they were on all these bearings. So I told them just to put their foot in and shake the bearings away and then just slide your foot and you won't fall. But they didn't do it and they kept falling and some of them got injured from it. So we finally went over to Japan and asked them if they'd please stop.
We definitely need to do a panel on the making of great moments with Mr. Lincoln. There's obviously a lot of stories to tell there too. Alice, I think one thing I think is interesting about Phantom Manor maybe is that they did go back to that bride and they made her the whole story. So, you know, it's just a different thing. It's interesting, you know, I see what you're saying about how the grounds are not pristine and clean anymore, like Walt had said for Disneyland. So
I think what Jeff's going to do next is we're going to go get Tony Baxter, who, now that he doesn't work for the company, he speaks freely in the language, and I can have him explain why you do ScareLA.
any more questions?
First, thank you so much for being here. This is incredible. Can you describe the early control systems that were used for the animatronic characters? Were they electromechanical? Were they tape? Anything in that area?
Well, if I start to explain that, we'll be here a week from Tuesday. Constant change, and we're using new tools, everything we could learn, we constantly applied to our show control systems, to the point that by 1971 and 72, we had our own system called DAX, Digital Animation Control System. We did that for a number of years until we found that the rest of the industry was coming up with their own control systems that were lighter, simpler, and you could simply buy them. Nowadays, most of the stuff that we use is pretty much you know, just store-bought stuff. But the earliest days, if you really want to know what it was like in 1954, some of you know the story of the little dancing man. This was a little tiny display, a little dancing guy, you know, maybe a thing about a foot high, and it had cables going down to a drum that was maybe 2 feet diameter, and it had cardboard discs and little rollers, all mechanically made. Wendell Rogers was working on that thing every day, and I was sitting about 5 feet away from him, And Walt would come in about every day and they'd shake his head and they were gonna get this thing going. I felt so sorry for that guy. This was a piece of junk. That was never gonna work. Walt wanted some kind of animation. Then within a year, we were doing stuff with little electrical switches. We even took how many of you guys car knows what a Cadillac Optronic eye is? We were using a Cadillac Optronic eye, which is a headlight shifter, and we would use that on the cardboard cams. Otherwise, we had to use aluminum cans. Pretty soon we got down to where we could run things on tape, and the big breakthrough was the Tiki Room down at Disneyland, where we put everything on a 1-inch tape with 16 tracks. Now we had a tape that was not necessarily digital, it was kind of more like an analog signal that we could peel off the signal with a little blue device called a fridge. And that way we could run a whole bunch of devices in sync all on one 16-inch track. But the problem was, if the electric voltage shifted, which was Abraham Lincoln's problem, the voltage in the park would shift, and if you have a track that says left arm goes up and down, and you shift frequency just a hair, it means left leg goes sideways. Well, you can imagine the chaos we went through on the tape with these frequency discriminator fringes, and the New York World's Fair, it really became very rough because Abraham Lincoln would suddenly turn into a spastic and he would kick the chairs. You wouldn't want to be anywhere near this guy because he'll really bruise you pretty bad. We found out an interesting thing about 3:15 in the afternoon when this place was being constructed. Lincoln got a really bad temperament. We never could figure it out. One day a guy came on, he says, when the guys turn off their power equipment and get ready to go home, the voltage starts going up in the Department of Electricity, and New York couldn't control it. So you have this voltage drift. It only takes a minute shift of either frequency or voltage, and it completely confuses these little blue tubes called fridges. So we had kind of a fridgitis, and then we saw we put a controllable power supply, cancel the whole thing. Lincoln wasn't sick after all.
I think maybe.
The thing I enjoyed with it was that when he would go berserk, he was usually standing up, and he would sit down in this beautiful oak chair, and he'd just smash it to bits. Sitting on the floor, and the chair was all over.
We cured that because we had a thing called Go Home Code, which the minute Lincoln misbehaved in the slightest, the program would immediately drop out and a fixed code would go in where Lincoln would go into a position at about a half a second, which was usually like a kind of a neutral standing thing, which means it wouldn't damage anything and he wouldn't look as crazy.
I think two more questions. So I can't see, unfortunately, over there. Yes.
Hi there. This is probably a question more for Mrs. Davis, but when Mark would come up with these concept sketches, would he ever concern himself with the technical execution of it? Would he worry about, oh, I came up with this great story, could it actually come to fruition? Was he ever involved with Yale Gracie and saying, well, how would we do this? Is it possible? Or would he just come up with these great ideas? Thank you.
I don't think he asked on how would we do this. He would say, this is the idea I have, I put down here, and I'd like to talk to you in regards to what I'm hoping will come, how you can make this work, and if it doesn't work, I'll come back with and think up some other ideas, and maybe we'll come up with what we want, or maybe even better. And if something went wrong, sometimes in trying to repair what was wrong, you come up with a better idea and it comes out differently, and you'll have a whole new batch of sketches in no time for everybody to see. So it was I think the group, Mark had great affection for all of the workmen, and I think they had for him. And it was a group effort. Mark would come up with an idea, and they would maybe come up with one that might do it better. Or maybe they weren't coming up to what he wanted, and he would think that maybe if we did this, it would work better. But when it was all finished and the finished drawing was there, and lost, we'd done it again. And that's the best part.
Thank you. One more question, maybe.
I'd just like to ask each of you what your favorite room or feature is in the Haunted Mansion.
What's your favorite feature in the Haunted Mansion? Oh yeah, it's Alice. She likes all of them.
Now, I think the thing I like the best is the cage for the bird with the blood and the bones. And the old house with all the drapery and so forth, and the palm tree. I've always enjoyed that because that was from my time, which was long before you were even thought of. You're welcome.
I really like the ballroom scene because I keep my fingers crossed that when the ride breaks down, it breaks down there. With the spin twice, and I'm there for about 5 minutes, and finally I can see everything in there.
You're checking those in the mirror at the end when you go. I think it's a perfect ending, like just a little special treat at the end. You can take someone home with you.
Thank you so much.
No, so thank you all for coming. Let me this is self-serving, a little plug, but I will be at Bill Root's Seven Hells booth for an hour, signing books, if anyone's interested. It's 124, I think. And so, thank you very much for coming. Let's have another hand for our